Thiesh Gaming here with my TBC class picking guide, this time covering the Warlock. So, the parameters, as previous videos, will be boss DPS and single target damage, overall raid DPS, class and spec utility, PvP strength, overall desirability in raids, and my thoughts. So, Affliction Lock. They have moderate to high single target damage, very high AoE / raid damage, offensive and defensive spec utility. In general, Warlock strength is quite high in PvP, and the UA variation, which is 41 points in Affliction, is quite potent, though not ideal. And generally, you will only need one Affliction lock in raids, but it will be a less desirable role and therefore have less competition due to the lower damage ceiling compared to Destruction. General thoughts is that Affliction is kind of the sacrificial lock spec. You're still very good, you're just not as good as Destruction, but you bring two very important debuffs to the bosses, and your rotation is generally a little bit more interesting. You are applying and keeping dots up and shadow bolting in between as opposed to just shadow bolting. Your unique spec utility that's very good is Curse of Elements paired with Malediction, a deep Affliction talent that increases the bonus damage effect by 3%. If you notice, the new Curse of Elements includes Shadow and Arcane damage, which means that you only need one Warlock to keep it up. You don't need Curse of Shadows and Curse of Elements, they're just combined. And lastly, Shadow Embrace. And Shadow Embrace reduces physical damage caused by 5%. This is really important on bosses, but especially important on AoE packs. If you notice, it says Seed of Corruption causes this. If you are spamming Seed of Corruption dealing damage, then you are increasing the number of mobs that can be in an AoE pack before your tank is overwhelmed. Next up, we have Demonology. Deep Demonology gets a new Felguard pet, which is quite good. It's a beefy, essentially a pocket warrior with no MS. What it's really good for, though, is solo leveling. It's kind of outclassed in PvE and PvP group content. However, if you are the one Warlock in a physical cleave group, then the Demonology spec can be good because you're just adding to the physical debuff and buff stacking by having it. SLSL Lock. This is not a PvE spec. This is entirely a PvP spec. It is very strong. You get a lot of durability and a lot of control and also damage, which is the three things that you want in PvP. It's not a desirable raid spec, but is a very desirable Warlock in many comps. It's one of the best PvP specs, in fact, and has a lot of different brackets and team comps that it can fit into. The main things that it focuses around, SLSL, is Siphon Life and Soul Link. So Siphon Life is a instant cast dot that heals you and deals damage. If you put this up on multiple people, then you're getting a steady stream of health. And Soul Link is 20% of your damage taken is transferred to your pet. So essentially a 20% damage reduction for you. Combine this with Master Demonologist, and you can get pretty tanky, even as a damage class. So the usual pet will be Fell Hunter, which is 70 to all of your resistances, which makes you much better against casters. I believe Succubus is used at times. I'm not an expert on the nuances of pet selection versus team comps, but those two stand out as being the most likely pets that you'll be using. Lastly, we have Deep Destruction, or 0-2140. This is the very high single target damage, so best in class single target damage, very high AoE raid damage. You don't have any spec utility other than the ability to potentially tank some fights, but you do have your class utility, which is pretty high. The damage of this class is very high, though in PvP you're generally much squishier and easier to focus, which means that SLSL will generally be more desirable. In raids, you are a very desirable class, with many raids wanting 3+ warlocks, being deep destruction. This is the big damage class of the expansion, mostly because they offer the best balance of single target and AoE, in addition to also helping tank. So unlike Hunter can potentially be a stronger single target damage, but falls off when it comes to multi-target fights. This is the best of both worlds. Very high single target damage, very high AoE damage. And with the addition of Soul Shatter, a new ability, which is a, I believe, 3-minute cooldown in TBC, which reduces your threat by half, you can get around one of the Warlock's main problems, which is threat dependency. Now, in fights with lots of threat drops, you still have to be careful because you're doing high damage and you have a very long cooldown for your threat management. As far as why do Warlocks win out in TBC, and I wanted to cover this rather than class utility, the reason why they scale so hard is because they have so many multiplicative percent increases to their damage built into their class and given from other classes. So the reason why you want multiple is because improved Shadow Bolt. Every time you crit with a Shadow Bolt, shadow damage is increased by 20% until four non-periodic damage sources are applied. Warlocks will generate this for themselves and others. So multiple Warlocks all critting with Shadow Bolts will keep improved Shadow Bolt up and increase all of their damage, usually 20%. Demonic Sacrifice is 15% shadow damage, so that's just 15% damage on your Shadow Bolt. Shadow and Flame is 20% more of your spell power to your Shadow Bolt. And then you have Shadow Weaving and Misery. Shadow Weaving being 10% shadow damage and Misery being 5%. So you have a 5, a 10, a 15, a 20, and another 20% damage all stacking together to make your scaling go over the top. In addition, you can also get access to Totem of Wrath, which gives you 3% hit. It's one of the few ways that you can get spell hit from another class, and this opens up your ease of gearing, especially early on when you might not be able to get the requisite hit. So overall, immensely high scaling damage class that excels in both single target and AoE. In summary, Warlock are the big dick DPS of TBC. You have the best single target, best AoE, while also being mostly fight and team comp agnostic, which means you're a range class, so there are less mechanics that screw with you. And in order to do maximum DPS, all you need is a Shadow Priest somewhere in the raid and some other Warlocks. If you have an Ellie Shaman in your group, that's nice. If you have a Boomkin in your group, that's nice. But unlike Hunter, you can just kind of be thrown into a raid and perform much better without being specifically catered to. While there will be 4+ Warlocks per raid, it should be a pretty competitive slot to go for. Just because I imagine that many people who are playing Fury Warriors, Mages in Classic right now will be re-rolling Warlock in order to maintain their spot at the top. So keep that in mind. People know that Warlock is the class to beat for TBC, and the people who are interested in topping damage will be rolling this class in order to compete for those meter spots. Otherwise, if there's anything you'd like to add, any questions you have, any comments, I try and respond to all of them. If you leave them below, I'd be much obliged, and thank you for watching.